Hello, everyone, and welcome to an overview of Advanced Discovery. This is going to go a bit further detail into using Device42 to collect application config information and go in greater depth of detail on applications and services config information, as well as resource utilization and scheduling discovery at more frequent intervals. This is something that is typically completed after the initial discovery and identifying the inventory, and is going to help supplement for engagements that are using application dependency mapping and resource utilization. Now, when we talk about advanced and detailed discovery, this only exists in very specific locations. This is related to your compute OSs, so this will be for your NICs and Windows hosts. So NICs, as a reminder, this is all of your Linux, Unix, Solaris, Oracle based systems, and Windows, of course, all of your Windows NT based OSs. Now, I am navigating to our discovery, and we're going to go through configuring a discovery job with some of these additional options. Of course, if you just missed how I got here, this is through Discovery, Hypervisors, Nix Windows, and I can either modify an existing job or add a new one. Now, with these options, they could add quite a lot of overhead and extend the time of discovery. So oftentimes, if you have previously large scans that are doing basic discovery, you're going to get a greater benefit by setting up new jobs that are more focused around target criteria where you need application data or need resources. You don't want to run this in a guest client environment where we're pulling workstations on laptops where you really don't care about that information. So first I'm going to change my platform here where I can select either Nix or Windows. Now these options do exist mostly the same between Nix and Windows. There are going to be some caveats that Windows has over Nix that I'll show briefly in a moment. Now go ahead and set this up same as it were previously. I typically recommend in the job name adding a few different key criteria. So I'm going to say that this is our Nix, AWS, uh, ADM, RU job. So just a few flags help know what this job is performing. Then I'm going to set this up against a few specific criteria. Again, the same applies where I can do a CIDR block, or I can do a list of IP addresses or host names, however I want to specify that task criteria. So 1042.2/24, that's a local Linux lab environment that we have here with relatively small environment. It's going to have anywhere from 15 to 100 hosts online at any moment. So not too heavy, but they are specifically running a few different services that exist in the environment. So that's going to be what I target for this particular task. Now for the options I use, we generally don't want to have anything as large as like a /16 here. We want to limit this to be a subset of hosts. So think a handful up to as large as maybe at most 250 to 300 in any single job. And if you are including hundreds of devices in a job with these options, you are going to want to be mindful of the type of scheduling you include. So now I have my targets in here, I'll go ahead and pick out some of the credentials that we use in this environment. So I know our dev test account is for this, and I'll go ahead and select that. Now, additionally, we do have some Oracle running in this environment, or MS SQL. So collect database server information. This is our detailed discovery. So this is going to go a bit further into what Oracle and MS SQL instances exist, and particularly log into their management views to collect instance and database information, get file sizes and rows, gets a lot greater detail of those databases. And this requires separate credentials from the device. So here I would be selecting our OS level credentials where we log into the host. It may be the same if it's configured that way, but this might be something that's dedicated to the database. So I would go ahead, search for my database credentials here, whatever I might be using. So I have a DBA and SA account. I can go ahead and select those for my management view of my Oracle or SQL databases. Next off is our interval-based discoveries. So this is going to be enhancing the collected information a bit further and looking at changes to what connections exist in services that are running on those hosts. So ADM sampling is looking at, is there a service that we know about already? So we discovered the device in the basic discovery, we pulled in its services, maybe some connections at the time, but ADM sampling is going to be used to say, our applications are dynamic. They're not always going to be running. We might have some databases that are always listening, but the clients connect to them. That's going to change throughout the day. So every 15 minutes, I want to log into this subset of 20 or 100 hosts and just look at the connection data. And this runs as its own independent discovery. We create what we call periodic job schedules from these intervals after the first run, which maintain their own schedules for these more focused discoveries. And I'll show that in a moment. So again, this is just getting specific metadata around the services, any new services running, and any new connections that exist to keep that application relationship data up to date and identify changes. Same concept for resource utilization. This again adds a periodic job for resource utilization for any poll devices. And I would set up against that sampling interval as well, whatever I selected. If I am doing hundreds of hosts here, up to 1,000, you're going to want to be careful about that interval. You probably wouldn't want to do anything more frequent than an hour. If you need more frequent than that, you want to make sure you refine that target criteria to be a more focused and reasonable number of hosts. Again, this is an agentless discovery solution, which does require the remote collectors and Windows Discovery services to go out and pull these hosts remotely. So it does take time for us to thread that, log into these hosts, query these systems, and depending on the complexity of the data, this could vary. So as you set this up, there is going to be some changes and control you'll have to be aware of as you run through that. And of course, I'll select my remote collectors in here. I can do that at the start or at the end there, whichever I want to run and reach that environment. So now I have those intervals set, and I have collect database server information. I'm going to look at software and applications. So by default, if you were to set up a discovery and not change any settings, just include the target and criteria, it is always going to collect software, services, and applications. And the applications, these are your common apps: Oracle, MS SQL, IS, Apache, about 15 applications. But it doesn't actually collect app config information, which would include things like instances, database names, websites, paths, bindings, jars, war files, different information like that. So I can select to include those, and what's important here is, depending on the size of those application config files, that's going to extend the time for discovery. But that data might be critical for application hosts where we're talking to an app owner, we're trying to identify what that host might be for, what business application it's related to. It's going to help reveal some of that information. What IIS website is this running? What instances exist, and so on. Similar concept with software config file information. This will increase the length of discovery an extraordinary amount. Now, this will go to anytime we see software that's installed and has a service running, we're going to go to the directory of that software and service and cat all the different config files and INI files that exist for that. So this is used in very seldom circumstances. I wouldn't recommend enabling this, except if you need to exactly replicate that workload. So let's say you are moving these hosts and you need the exact config file structure that's going to be rebuilt. Maybe you're going to be refactoring them as containers in other applications, so you need to get all the Nginx config files and different information like that. That is where the seldom use cases, you might be selecting those. Some other host discovery options here that aren't enabled by default are capturing host file information. This is going to add the host file of any discovered devices as application components. So if you care about the host file, you want to make sure there's no hard-coded names in that host file, we can pull that information in so you can validate and report on that. So those are primary advanced options I typically recommend walking through. We'll go ahead, I'm just going to uncheck the software config files because I mentioned that does increase the length that this discovery runs extraordinarily. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and we'll run it. Now as this runs, and after you've ran discoveries in the past, you've likely noticed that there's a few stages that it goes through. So first is basic discovery. So as a reminder, this is collecting device, host, OS, hardware, CPU, memory, disk information. We then go into detailed discovery. This is going to be your software, services, service schedules, and application config information. We then have advanced discovery, which is specifically the database discovery. So if there is Oracle and MS SQL running, it's going to collect that information at that point. So we validate each of these hosts as we go through that. So as it runs basic discovery, it's going to find, all right, from that /24 network, here's all the hosts we logged in, discovered, collected information on. Okay, out of those, these are the ones that have services, software, and application data. We need to set up a detailed discovery. And then of those that we pulled software, services, and application details, these are the ones that have Oracle and SQL databases on them. And it's going to run them in stages. So as we pull the basic information, these are those that need to run detailed discovery. Once it completes that, we find any that need to be ran with the advanced discovery to collect Oracle and SQL database information. And it goes through those stages. Now, I didn't mention configuring the auto discovery schedule in that past screen, but the auto discovery schedule is going to pertain to these particular stages. So any schedule I set here is going to set when it runs through the complete discovery. So it collects all device, software, application, config information, the database details, any of those options that I set. After this first discovery run, it's going to create periodic jobs based upon the ADM sampling intervals or resource utilization intervals that we set. So once I've set these interval options, I do need to run the discovery job at least one time to create and initialize those. But after that's done, it then maintains those periodic jobs separately. And I can find those in reports, periodic jobs, and I'll go ahead and open that in a new tab while that's running. So here we can go ahead and see those, and you'll notice each device that's been discovered and had those options set is going to be enabled with those options. So a few here we are enabled for the ADM sampling interval running every 30 minutes, and some we have options for RUU and ADM running at both. And here we can select to export this information out and disable any of these periodic jobs if we need to, and then run a discovery to re-enable them at a later time if we want to do that. But that is going to go ahead and keep those maintained and running on their own independent schedule from that main discovery job, which allows more control around them. We can have devices maintaining their own interval schedule at different points if some need to run more frequent than others. All right, so let's just recap some quick highlights. So we have the interval discovery. This is going to include your ADM sampling interval and RU interval. So again, specifically focused on metadata that is going to provide services and connection information that can run more frequently and runs independently than the basic discovery. So generally you can have these more frequently running, and then your broader discovery jobs that run infrequently throughout the day to collect all data about those particular devices. We then have database discovery. This is going to go in greater depth of information for MS SQL and Oracle, and they run at the advanced discovery stage. So they run after the basic and detailed discoveries collected and just against hosts that are eligible with Oracle and MS SQL management views that we can connect to. Then we have the application config discovery. So this is in addition to selecting the store application config files and software config files, which is going to be pulling the different INI and XML files for common applications that we identify. Now, that can extend the length of discovery extraordinarily and the size of data that is captured, depending on the size of those application files, which in some cases they may be multiple megabytes in size. We will have to walk that and cat that file and bring that back to Device42, which generally we will see a much greater increase in the discovery time. Storing software config file information looks at all installed software and services that we've discovered and pulls all their config file information. You should expect an extraordinarily amount of time increased with that additional option, and again, used in only very seldom use cases. Specifically, if you need to replicate the exact config file for all software against workloads. And it's not typically necessary, as the basic discovery is going to give you all of your software version name information, and that runs much quicker. So if you think about your standard discovery, collecting and discovering software and application details with the default options, it generally takes a few seconds on each host. If you include the store app component config file information and software config file information, you're going to be looking at a few minutes for each host in some cases.